Okay, look, I know I already made an hour-long video on the Thaumaturge, but as it turns out, I do still have a lot more to say. Let's go. Hello folks, Phil Gallagher, aka Thraben, you here for another Pathfinder 2E video, and this is a sequel to my Advanced Thaumaturge guide. Welcome to my Thaumaturge Implements guide. Let's do a little businessy stuff before I get going here. The channel is now officially 1 year old. I released my Thaumaturge guide about 1 year and 2 weeks ago as of the time of this video going live, which is crazy. I didn't realize I had been doing Pathfinder stuff for that long. If you're enjoying what I'm doing, please consider supporting the channel. A YouTube membership is a great way to financially support my channel if you're in the position to do so. Otherwise, things like likes and comments mean a lot. Remember, YouTube members do get early access to all of my videos, including this one. And thank you very much to Oliver in particular for funding this video and coming up with the idea to return to the Thaumaturge to talk about some stuff. Now, I'm going to make two assumptions going into this video. Number one, I am going to assume that you know what a Thaumaturge is and how their basic abilities work. If you don't know that yet, please consider watching my advanced guide to the Thaumaturge first, and I will link that down in the video description, and then come back to this video. That video has the basics, well, and a lot of advanced stuff, honestly, but this one is going to be maybe even more in-depth than the previous one. I'm also going to make the assumption that you have the general gist of what each implement does. I'm going to put their full text on the screen for every one of these, but I am not necessarily going to read out every single portion of every ability here. So my goals for today are to go over all 10 of the implements. There used to be 9, and then we got a new shield implement recently that I'll be covering as well. And I'm going to explain when you might want to select that implement. On what sort of character, in what sort of campaign. Is this a roleplay heavy thing? Is this a combat heavy thing? Giving you a feeling for when these are going to be good. And I'm going to give you a lot of my play experience from playing with the Thaumaturge. I've used 4 of these implements myself in actual play. In like a long-term campaign. I have play tested most of the others. I have used a bunch of them in Dawnsbury Day mods or in Dawnsbury Days proper. And I've got a lot of things to say about the Thaumaturge. Certainly more than an hour worth. And then at the end, because I know people like this sort of stuff, I'm going to give you my own implement tier list for how good I think each one of these things is. Without further ado, let's get into it. We are going to begin alphabetically, so we're going to start with the Amulet. I like the Amulet a lot. The Amulet is one of, I think, 4 different reaction implements that the Thaumaturge has access to. And I think by level 5, most Thaumaturges probably want one of the reaction implements unless you are getting a reaction from somewhere else. For example, I really like the champion dedication on a Thaumaturge. I think that is a very, very powerful reaction. And if you are intending to get your reaction from a champion dedication, well, the value of some of these implements is going to go down. That doesn't mean it is wrong to have multiple different reactions on the same character. And in fact, I do like that quite a bit, as it increases the consistency of you using your reaction. And this is a good defensive reaction. Notably here, it is not what I would call a generic reaction, because the trigger for this is the target of your exploit vulnerability would damage you or an ally within 15 feet. So this is not just going to trigger whenever somebody takes damage. This is only the target of your exploit vulnerability. So there is sort of some skill testing stuff going on here where you do want to make sure you are exploiting vulnerability on the thing that is most likely to damage your allies so that you can actually consistently use your reaction. It can be used on yourself, which is pretty cool. You are target ally within 15 feet, gain resistance to all damage against the triggering damage, the resistance is equal to 2 plus your level. That is some pretty solid damage mitigation, and it only gets better as you go on. With the adept benefit, you end up giving some lingering resistance, and it might not make sense at first why this is happening, but if you understand how the math of enemies in Pathfinder works, they're very likely to crit you on the first attack, and they're still pretty darn likely to hit you on their second attack. Meaning that you reduce this first set of damage, maybe from a strong hit or a critical hit, and then if that enemy, or really anybody else, is hitting you with that same type of damage, you mitigate that as well. When you start reaching mid-level play and you can intensify vulnerability, this is kind of like a raise shield benefit that you are getting from the amulet. That's not quite true. When you raise a shield, you get a circumstance bonus to AC. Just period, full stop. This is a status bonus to AC and saves against the target of your exploit vulnerability. So when you are in a fight versus a limited number of foes, let's push it to an extreme, and let's say that this is a solo boss encounter, this intensify vulnerability option is pretty strong because it is going to feel like, hey, this is a +2 to AC, period, and this is a +2 to my saves, period. When you are in a fight with 5 enemies, though, it's a totally different story. So the intensify vulnerability thing here, I would kind of rate as medium. It is going to be very good in some times when it is important. If you are facing a very dangerous spellcaster, that +2 status bonus to saves is a pretty big deal. And notably, you can get circumstance bonuses to AC relatively easily. Status bonuses are a little harder, so you may be able to finagle things and stack a circumstance and status bonus at the same time. And the Paragon benefit is obviously pretty sweet. In terms of evaluating this, I do think that the amulet is, generally speaking, pretty strong. I don't think you are going to be sad or unhappy with the amulet if you take it. It might not feel as good as the champion reaction, but I don't think we want to treat every reaction as being compared to the champion's reaction because that is so strong. This is something that gives your character a good defensive option, and this is something that is going to make you a good party member, because Pathfinder 2E is this team game, right? And you don't necessarily want your character to be all about you. Helping to mitigate some damage helps to keep the party alive as a whole, and this is a tool that can be used to keep you alive or your allies alive. Big thumbs up to this one. As a final note here, this is fully a combat implement, right? There are no real roleplay uses to this item at all. If you are playing at a roleplay first table, this is probably not the implement for you, despite the fact that it is very, very good in combat. All this does is combat-related stuff, so keep that in mind. And let's use that as a point to pivot into the next implement, which is the bell. The bell is another thing that only has functionality in combat, and it is another reaction implement. It almost feels like a couple of different implements because despite the fact that the ring bell reaction is written as a single reaction, it's two very different things. So you have the distracting cacophony, which is used to kind of disrupt spells, and the disrupting harmony, which is used to disrupt strikes. So let's start with the cacophony. So the target must succeed at a fortitude save against your class DC or become stupefied 1 or stupefied 2 on a crit fail. Target doesn't have to attempt the flat check to avoid losing the triggering spell, but it does lower the spell attack roll or spell DC of the triggering spell from stupefied. This is, in my opinion, just fully not good. I'm not going to sugarcoat it here. I think this is pretty bad. So when we compare this to the amulet just happens, right? And I'm going to click back to that for a second. There is no roll necessary here to prevent this damage. There's no roll necessary to give this resistance. With the bell, in order for this to do anything, you are still spending your reaction, and then the enemy has to fail or critically fail a fortitude save. And this is not like on a success, it's still stupefied 1. On a failure, it's stupefied 2. No, on a success, nothing is happening here. And to use your reaction, which is relatively valuable on a Thaumaturge, for a chance of doing nothing, I don't like that. And I also don't think that the failure effect is even that good. Stupefied 1 sounds great in theory, but due to the timing of when this happens, I don't actually think it's going to be that impactful, right? So the monster casts a spell that is probably a 2-action activity during its turn, and you're like, oh, ding a ding a ding a ding a ding a ding a ding. You distracted, it fails, now it's stupefied 1. Cool, the DC or spell attack roll went down by 1, but that is probably all that is doing. That monster is probably not going to then cast another spell where the chance of failing the stupefy flat check actually comes in and is relevant. Now on the critical failure, like, cool, we're in business. That stupefied is going to carry over since it is stupefied 2 rather than stupefied 1. And that is great, but I don't think that is going to happen all that often. And when we get to the disrupting harmony, it is now a will save, or it's going to become enfeebled 1 or clumsied 1, or enfeebled 2 or clumsy 2 on a critical failure. Now, you do get your choice of that, but I think I would rather just have an amulet that is guaranteed to make a difference rather than the disrupting harmony reaction of the bell that may or may not actually make a difference. Every +1 matters in this system, and that is absolutely true, but I think the bell is highly inconsistent at giving a -1 or potentially a -2 to these DCs and attack rolls and spell attack rolls. Because this specifically requires a saving throw, I'm giving this one a pretty big thumbs down. Now, when you reach the adept benefit level, things change a little bit, and the conditions from the ring bell last for 3 rounds instead of 1 round. At that point, the bell is much more interesting. But there's still a chance that your reaction does absolutely nothing if they are passing these saving throws. The Intensify Vulnerability benefit later on can make it so that the enemies are more likely to fail or critically fail these saving throws, but I'm still just not the biggest fan of using action economy to make something that is bad better. I would rather just be doing things that are good and taking actions to make the things that are good better. The bell is one of the few implements that I am just largely not a fan of. If you're a big fan of the bell, get down in the comments, defend the bell. I'm not doing that. Next up is the Chalice. This is our first active implement. That is an implement that is going to require you to use an action in combat in order to take advantage of it. And this is largely going to be an in-combat implement. And I'm going to skip ahead here. I say that this is largely in combat because this can be used for out of combat in between encounter healing, albeit slowly. But let's go through the abilities in order now. So when you drink from the chalice, you choose to do one of 2 things. You are either sipping or you are draining. And you can use your actions to sip yourself or drain the chalice yourself or administer this to an adjacent ally. The sip is going to give you temporary hit points equal to 2 plus half of your level that last until the start of your next turn. Generally speaking, I find this amount of temporary HP to be very underwhelming. And if you are using the chalice to sip every single turn, you are eating up a lot of action economy, and you should probably only be doing this if you are a primary frontliner in a campaign that doesn't have too many frontline characters. So you really, really, really need to make sure that you are not going down. You are expecting to take hits every single turn. So you are using, sip, 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 sip every turn to keep up a large amount of HP over time. If you sip and nobody hits you, you have fully just wasted an action, and those temporary hit points are going to disappear. Putting some numbers in perspective here, this sample level 1 Thaumaturge I have opened that doesn't really have any abilities set and randomly just has +1 con has 17 hit points. So 2 hit points added to this, 2 temporary HP, is not all that much, and that may or may not be a deal breaker from you going down. But over the course of a 5-turn combat, if that 2 HP is used every turn, and instead that turns into 10 extra HP, then that is starting to feel like a very, very meaningful difference. Note here that the frequency on Drink from the Chalice is once per round. Now, the Drain ability is pretty cool. This is actual healing, not temporary HP. So this heals you at first level for 3 hit points. You can still keep sipping from it after you drain it, and then after 10 minutes, like I mentioned before, it will refill itself. Now, 3 hit points per level is not amazing healing. It's noticeable, but it's not amazing. And this is where the adept benefit starts coming in. So when you drink from the chalice before the end of your next turn, if you got hit by piercing or slashing damage from a foe's critical hit, or you took persistent bleed damage, instead you heal for a lot more. On a sip, the temporary HP goes to 2 plus your charisma modifier, which is going to be your highest stat, plus your level. And that is a very real amount of temporary hit points. When drained, that healing goes up to 5 hit points for each level you have. So with careful timing about when you drain this, you can actually heal for a more substantial amount. I'd say the Chalice implement is not overly impressive. I found in testing this implement that I felt like I was not getting enough out of my actions when using SIP in particular, and that I felt that actions would better spent be moving, demoralizing, recalling knowledge, and just doing other things that I was capable of doing. This is one that I would say I was slightly disappointed in, but in the right party composition, where you maybe don't just have a healing font cleric who is going to patch you up all of the time, and everybody needs to do a little something to stay alive, this could be something that you think about. The Chalice is perhaps one that I would not think about taking as my first implement, but when I get a second implement at level 5, maybe I combine this with another defensive implement, and all of a sudden, I have a defensive reaction and some temporary hit points and the ability to do a little bit of healing, and maybe that starts to pad out the character. The Lantern is the first implement that is probably more focused on roleplay than it is on combat. And I think this is going to take very, very specific circumstances for you to want to take this one. So the Lantern makes light. Bright light out to 20 feet, dim light out 20 feet further. Maybe if your GM is a super stickler about things like light and dark vision and low light vision, this could be good in your campaign setting. But for the most part, in the scenarios that I have played, light has not played all that much of a factor. Because honestly, I think caring about things like light is getting to the point where maybe it is just not fun if you are thinking about that. Now, specifically, if your GM is using magical darkness quite a bit, this does have the ability to potentially just counteract that, which is kind of cool. And it does attempt to reveal the unseen. You get a bonus to perception checks to notice things, and a +1 status bonus to recall knowledge against creatures within the bright light. Again, that's within 20 feet of you. So this is why I say that this is really a roleplay heavy one. During exploration, even if you aren't searching, the GM rolls a secret check for you to find traps, environmental hazards, haunts, and secrets like secret doors. And the GM rolls each time a secret comes within 20 feet of you and within the lantern's bright light. I don't love this because this puts the burden of your character's abilities onto the GM. Your GM is doing a great service. Your GM is probably working hard. They probably have a ton of enemy stat blocks. They have probably tons of notes about the roleplay you are going to do, locations. They're looking up DCs for things. And honestly, I think the average GM is probably going to forget that you have this lantern a ton of the time and not give you the roles that this should be prompting. If you are in an investigation roleplay heavy campaign where the emphasis is going to be on solving things, yes, this might be good within that very specific context. But I think if you are showing up to the average table with a lantern implement, I don't feel like you are going to get a lot out of that relative to the other implement options. The adept benefit is reasonable. You can get better at fighting invisible and ethereal creatures, but I feel like this is something that is just covered by low-level spells anyway. When I play spellcasters, I always keep some sort of fairy fire revealing light style spell that solves this problem. If you don't have spellcasters in your party and this could fall to you to solve, that's reasonable. But this is also something that you could solve via scroll thaumaturgy by just having an appropriate spell in a scroll in your inventory. And sure, maybe it takes you an action to draw it and 2 actions to use it, and that's your full turn. But you could just have a better implement the rest of the time. If you hypothetically get up to the Paragon benefit level, like, it is kind of cool to just get free counteract checks versus any illusion or transmutation effect. Well, I guess for the purposes of determining whether or not you can see through it. But this is another implement that I am largely underwhelmed by. Next up is the mirror, and I absolutely love the mirror. I tried playing an Echo Knight in D&D 5e and was just largely frustrated with how the rules worked, or more accurately, often didn't work because it was so unclear about how those abilities were actually supposed to work. Whereas I feel like most of the time with the mirror's reflection, it is more obvious how things should work. The most simple use case for this is just making a flanking buddy for yourself. One action, you make a duplicate of yourself, effectively giving you a +2 to hit because you are flanking your opponent and making them off guard. Sometimes you are going to feel the downside of having 2 pawns on the battlefield, as that increases the number of enemies that are going to be able to get to you. And when AoEs happen, there is a higher chance that you are going to end up in that AoE. But I think the upside mitigates the downside here. This often turns the Thaumaturge into a one-man sort of debuff machine, because you can do things like get the enemy off guard and then demoralize them, and then have a decent chance at getting a solid hit in with a third action on your turn. The adept benefit is something that I am not really sure is good for you. So while the mirror's reflection is in effect, if the enemy hits either you or your duplicate, the one that they hit shatters. 100% of the time, the one that they hit shatters. And it deals slashing damnation to all creatures in a 5-foot emanation around where the mirror was. The damage is equal to 2 plus half your level or the damage of the triggering attack, whichever is lower. You are immune to this damage. So I don't like this for a number of reasons. Number 1, this is not a may. You cannot choose whether or not this happens. This just always happens. They always hit the mirror reflection. And this means that, let's imagine this is a boss scenario where everyone is crowded around one creature. The slashing damage that happens here is going to hit everybody in that 5-foot emanation, not just the enemy. So this can often end up hitting your allies as well. And I don't like the fact that you lose some agency here, and that this is something that potentially damages your allies more than the enemy. That said, the Intensify Vulnerability benefit is pretty sweet. Concealment is cool. I will say, based on my experiences, the mere thaumaturges tend to be very action hungry, and you might not intensify vulnerability as many times as you might think that you would. Because a lot of times you might, have a turn where you move, you exploit vulnerability, you make a strike. Then your next turn might be, hey, this is now I make the mere duplicate, I demoralize you, I strike you, and then maybe in that third turn cycle, we're starting to think about using Intensify Vulnerability, and at that point, the fight is halfway over. I found the Intensify Vulnerability benefit to be good in particularly scary fights, where that flat check to avoid some damage might be very, very important, but otherwise I didn't actually end up using it a lot. And the Paragon benefit is obviously just insane. Anytime you get action compression in the system, like, huge thumbs up. Next up is the Regalia. Honestly, this is one of the best implements. I'm just gonna come out and say it, because while many of the implements have you make a choice between something that is good in combat and something that is good out of combat, the Regalia does both, because it is just going to give you a circumstance bonus to deception, diplomacy, and intimidation checks, as well as some benefits on Follow the Expert as well. Beyond that, it also gives an aura that gives you a status bonus to saves against fear. And if you would reduce your frightened value by 1, you reduce the frightened value of all allies within your inspiring aura by 1. So this gives you a +1 to 3 skills that you are probably going to be trained in at an absolute minimum, as you are a charisma-focused class, and you are probably going to keep up with one or multiple of these skills. Intimidation is great for demoralizing. Diplomacy is your most important social skill. Even if you don't necessarily do things with deception, it's probably pretty likely that you're going to keep up with some number of diplomacy and intimidation for in or out of combat uses. So this gives you 3 separate +1 circumstance bonuses, and an aura against fear, and the ability to reduce your allies' let's rephrase that, to reduce the frightened condition of all of your allies that are close to you. This does a lot for a single implement. And as time goes on, that bonus is going to just get better and better and better. A +2, later a +3, or if you get to master or legendary proficiency, a +4. Clarifying that is for the Follow the Expert stuff. Your circumstance bonus to those 3 stats is the +2, as long as you are a master in that skill. And once you have the Adept benefit, the status bonus, which used to just be against fear, is now against all saving throw against mental effects, which broadens it quite a bit. And then you and your allies start getting a +2 status bonus to damage rolls. And this is going to scale up later on beyond that. This is just incredibly solid. I took this as my 3rd implement on my personal thaumaturge that I played. And honestly, after I saw it in action, I wish I had taken it earlier. This is just generically very strong. I don't think the Intensify Vulnerability ability here is anything to write home about, but honestly, I don't really think that it needs to be, given how strong the remainder of this implement is. And the Paragon benefit does a couple of different things. The Follow the Expert bonus continues to get better, and then the combat stuff is more relevant, in my opinion. So allies in your Inspiring Aura aren't flat-footed from being flanked unless you are also flanked, and if one of your allies is clumsy, enfeebled, frightened, sickened, or stupefied, the status penalty your ally takes from that condition is 1 lower than the condition's value, as long as the ally remains in your aura, unless you are also affected by that same condition. If you don't know what implement to take on your Thaumaturge, the Regalia is a very, very good generic implement to take. I'm going to skip Shield for a moment and go to Tome because I think the Tome transitions better from the Regalia. The Tome is what I would consider a roleplay first implement that might have some secondary benefits on combat. And you get benefits in combat because you're going to get a circumstance bonus to skill checks to recall knowledge. But I think it is the out of combat stuff that matters more here. During your daily preparations, you can take the trained proficiency rank in 2 skills of your choice until you prepare again. You can you retain the benefit as long as the tome is on your person, even if you aren't holding it. At 3rd level, you become an expert in one of these skills and trained in the other, and at 5th level, you're an expert in both of the skills. As a thaumaturge, you are often going to be functioning as the face of the party, and you're often going to be a recall knowledge specialist as well. So getting benefits to recall knowledge is great. But if you really want to feel like a jack of all trades in the way that a 5e bard might, having the ability to just move some skill trainings and later on with expert and even greater proficiency beyond that, the ability to become exactly what you need to be for any given adventuring day is very, very powerful. And that flexibility is one of the things that makes the Animist so strong as a character. Just having the ability to go, hey, I need this specific lore for this specific day. The Animist is so good at doing that. Well, now your Thaumaturge can do that too. You don't just have to pick the general skills that the bubbles on your character sheet represent. You can go into specific lores that you need as well. Or if you know, hey, I'm going across an icy area, I'm going to need to do acrobatics checks to maintain my balance. Hey, now I'm an expert in acrobatics today. Oh, hey, I know we're going to go into a fight that is going to be, very, very difficult. I want to be able to trip this enemy. Well, okay, now I'm an expert in athletics today. And the adept benefit here is pretty strong. While holding your tome, at the start of each turn each round, attempt to check to recall knowledge about a creature of your choice that you're observing. If this check succeeds, you gain a +1 circumstance bonus to your next attack roll against that creature before the start of your next turn. When you gain temporary skill proficiencies during your daily preparations, one is at expert, the other is at master, and then at 9th level, you have master in both. This is really a great degree of flexibility on an already pretty flexible character. The Intensify Vulnerability activity is pretty good here. Fortune effects are very strong in Pathfinder 2E, and if you have played an investigator, you know how valuable it is to be able to know whether or not you are going to hit ahead of time. So you get to roll a d20 and set the result aside. At any time until the start of your next turn, you can use the d20 roll instead of your attack roll to target the target of your exploit vulnerability. But you don't have to. You can roll a nat 1 on this roll and then go, okay, I'm not using that, and just hit anyway. So this is just kind of a repeatable sure strike, which was good before, but now sure strike is nerfed and you only get to do that once per 10 minutes or once per combat. I forget the exact wording. This is a solid ability. And the Paragon benefit is just kind of insane. You get to take your already great esoteric lore with a +3 circumstance bonus and then use it for your initiative roll. And it just keeps doing stuff. There's so much text here. An increase from 1 to 2 on the circumstance bonus to recall knowledge. When you succeed at the recall knowledge check granted by the Tome Adept's benefit, the bonus applies to all attack rolls you make before the start of your next turn, not just your next one. And when you gain those skill proficiencies, both of them are just legendary. There is a lot to like here about the Tome. I think this is going to be roleplay first, combat second, but it is solid at both of them. Next up is the Shield implement. If you want to have a tanky thaumaturge, you are now capable of doing that. When I initially built my thaumaturge that I played for a little over a year, I went down the battle medicine string of feats because I was concerned with staying alive as a frontliner, and we were new to the system, and we maybe didn't understand everything 100% perfectly, and our strategies weren't 100% optimal. And so I thought it was going to be really important to have some healing. And the battle medicine was a one action activity that I got a lot of use out of. But now there is just an implement that can make you tanky without the need to go and eat up a bunch of your skill trainings and a bunch of your skill feats as well. Because I had to take battle medicine, and then I think I took godless healing and mortal healing and paragon battle medicine, and you get the idea, right? And keeping up that battle medicine and my treat wounds to be as good as I wanted them to be, it was a lot of investment. Well, now you can just take an implement that gives you the shield block general feat, and it gives you a shield that is maybe slightly better than a normal shield. There is some debate about the wording here and what you can and cannot do. And this is a time where I'm just going to read everything verbatim here. If your shield implement would be reduced to 0 hit points, it's instead reduced to 1 hit point. Its circumstance bonus to AC when you raise a shield is reduced by 1. This can't reduce the bonus below 0, and you can't shield block with your shield implement until it loses the broken condition. You can still use your shield as an implement when it has the broken condition. At 5th level, whenever you exploit vulnerability, you can also raise a shield as a free action. So there are some people who believe that the wording here is such that your shield effectively has double HP, with the idea being, hey, this is supposed to be a special shield that you can keep using when it has already reached its broken threshold. I do not believe that that is the case. There's some Reddit threads out there if you want to dig into kind of the rules minutia there. I believe the intention of this this feature is that you can have the shield implement still function as an implement even if it is past its broken threshold, meaning that you can still use it for your various Thaumaturge abilities that require you to be wielding or holding an implement. That is my understanding of that. Again, there is a little bit of debate here. The big thing that matters from this, in my opinion, is this 5th level thing. At 5th level, whenever you exploit vulnerability, you can also raise a shield as a free action. The Thaumaturge is really, really constrained in terms of its action economy. You just have so much that you want to be doing, and it is very, very difficult to do all of the things that you want to do. And that's just with your own class features. That's even when we're not getting to things like, hey, what are all the things that I am getting from a free archetype game? Exploit vulnerability is going to be one of your most common actions that you are taking. You are probably going to end up doing that 2 or 3 times in every single combat. So getting to raise a shield as a free action as a part of that action is great action compression, and that is great. And over time, the shield implement only gets better. You are eventually going to start getting a circumstance bonus to your circumstance bonus to AC applying to saving throws as well. You're going to more generically be able to shield block against more or less everything. Your shield is going to start regaining hit points, or if it is already full, you are going to pick up additional hardness equal to your charisma modifier, which again is probably going to be like 4 or 5. That is a very substantial amount of additional hardness. And then at the Paragon benefit level, you are going to be able to apply your circumstance bonus to AC and saves against spells to all of your allies within 15 feet of you. The shield implement is going to send you down a very different defensive path than many of the other implements. Things like the Amulet and the Bell are defensive with reactions, and this is defensive with actions. Initially, because you are using an action to raise your own shield, And later on, that raised shield is going to often become sort of absorbed into your exploit vulnerability action that you might be doing anyway. I like the shield implement a lot in smaller parties where you might have to do multiple different jobs. You can't just go up and be the person who is punching all of the time. You also need to be doing some damage mitigation and some tanking as well. I think the thaumaturges who need to not only be the face of the party, but also be the party tank or something like that are going to like the shield implement a lot. I think the shield implement is an implement that I would consider taking at level 5 rather than at level 1, because I think this is just such a strong payoff that you do want to just have that available when you have the shield implement. And something that I have said elsewhere in this video is that it is not necessarily a bad thing to have multiple reactions on a thaumaturge. I know a lot of the generic thaumaturge advice that you are going to read online says, hey, you should probably have one passive, one active, and one reaction implement. I don't think there is anything wrong with having an amulet implement and a shield implement and having two different solid defensive reactions that you can take under different circumstances. There is nothing wrong with exploiting vulnerability, getting a raised shield as a free action. The enemy goes, oh, I don't want to hit you now, your AC is too high. Hit somebody else, and bam, you use your amulet instead. Overall, I'm going to say that the shield implement is absolutely solid. Next up is the wand implement, which is a combat-focused implement, and very specifically, it is a ranged combat-focused implement. Most of the other implements so far are, relatively speaking, close quarters implements. So for example, the amulet is within 15 feet. The bell is slightly larger at 30 feet. The mirror's range is within 15 feet. The wand's base range for the fling magic activity is 60 feet, which later is going to be increasing to 120 feet. So immediately, the wand is pushing you in a very, very different direction from all of the other implements that we have seen thus far. It is encouraging you to stay away from the enemy. The damage of the wand implement is pretty mediocre, honestly. It is more or less like cantrip damage. If you expend additional energy while doing the fling magic activity, the damage switches to D6s instead of D4s, but then your wand gets a recharge time before you can do the boosted effect again. Although you can still keep flinging magic normally if you would like. If you critically hit with a strike, you do immediately just recharge your wand, though. The fling magic activity is really strange on a thaumaturge, because I think there's two different ways that you can play this. Number one is you can play this as something that you intend to do in the first round of combat only. So, while the enemy is still far away from you, you fling magic to open up your turn, maybe you exploit vulnerability, you recall knowledge, you do some stuff of that general nature to get set up, and then you close the gap and you intend on making melee strikes from there. And that is an okay way to start off a combat. More generally, though, I think people who take the wand are going to want to play the ranged thaumaturge fantasy. And unfortunately, with the way that the thaumaturge's hands work and needing to have a free hand to use the implements, it's not really meant to be used with something like a bow, which is a 1+ hands item, where you can hold the bow in one hand, but you need that second hand to fire it. And maybe your GM is going to look the other way and go like, yeah, I don't care if you use a bow, it's not going to break the game, but maybe they don't. And actually, I think the single best use for a fling magic wand thaumaturge is a thaumaturge who is playing in a mixed Starfinder 2E, Pathfinder 2E game. In Pathfinder 2E, the one-handed gun options are not going to be good for your thaumaturge, because you shoot once and then you need to reload. which is an action economy thing that you absolutely do not have room for in your action economy because you're so tight already. However, Starfinder 2E has one-handed guns that have a capacity and don't have to be reloaded every single turn. And I think you can probably cook up some pretty cool ranged thaumaturges who use a wand and a one-handed gun. And if you don't have to reload that gun, then you can have turn cycles where you 2-action fling magic and 1-action make a strike, and have some very, very consistent damage output. And when you reach the adept benefit for the wand, you have 2 good options. Cold, honestly, I just think sucks. A 10-foot status penalty to speeds for 1 round is not anything to write home about. Making the target shocked and making them flat-footed until the end of your next turn, well, that can absolutely matter for your rogues. That is very good party support for the other characters if you are not getting in the mix yourself. And persistent fire damage is pretty cool. So if I was playing a wand thaumaturge, I would be picking electricity and fire as my 2 elements, with the intention of usually using electricity for damage. It's not going to be resisted all that frequently, and then you can use fire to trigger weaknesses, or maybe in boss fight scenarios where you know a fight is going to take a little while, stacking up that persistent fire damage can be meaningful. I am not overly impressed with the Intensify Vulnerability option for Fling Magic. The Paragon benefit is what I would call neat. Practically speaking, I don't think there is much of a difference between a 120-foot range and a 180-foot range. I think for most battle maps, 120 feet is going to cover most or all of the field, especially after you have taken an initial move action. But the ability to affect creatures in a burst with it is pretty cool. And it changes it so that you get some AoE options on a character that is normally not going to be doing that unless you are relying on something like Scroll Thaumaturgy. The wand overall is, I would say, an okay option. I don't think it is one of the better implements by any stretch of the imagination, but if you are not fully concerned with optimizing your character for power, I think this can create some very, very fun builds. As an aside here, I want to take this moment to talk about free archetype games. I think there is a very big difference between a wand implement and a spellcasting dedication that is giving you cantrips. The wand implement is something that you take on your character, and that is one feature, right? This is one decision that you make. This is one of your implements. When you take a spellcasting dedication, that is a minimum of 3 things as a commitment, right? That is the spellcasting dedication, and assuming that you are going to be in a free archetype game and you are either going to get out of that or stay in it, that is a minimum of 2 other feats there, or potentially a decision that keeps you locked into something for the remainder of your campaign. I fully do not believe that it is worth it to use free archetype slots to get spellcasting benefits on a thaumaturge. I have said again and again and again in this video, like, the thaumaturge's action economy is tight, action compression is so important, and so on and so forth. So while I think using one thing on your thaumaturge to get the wand implement, I think that is totally fine. Is it the most optimal thing you can do with your character? Probably not, but I think it's fine. Whereas I think using your valuable free archetype slots to get a cantrip, which is notably not all that strong, and is always a 2-action activity, I don't think that is great. And I think the thaumaturge can rely on scrolls for out-of-combat utility, and does not really need the low-level spell slots that a spellcasting dedication could be giving them. And now we will move on to the final implement, the weapon implement. And initially, I thought the weapon implement was something that was just going to be fully necessary on every single thaumaturge, and I've come around on that idea since. I think the weapon is absolutely a solid implement. I don't think it is one that you have to just take on your characters. One of the big things that it is going to unlock is critical weapon specialization, which is a nice bonus, but not every single class needs that all of the time. And there are potentially some other workarounds from things like ancestry feats to give you that anyway. And this gives you your attack of opportunity. Specifically, it is against the target of your exploit vulnerability. And it will trigger on a concentrate, manipulate, or move action, or leaving a square during a move action that they are using. And I found that this tends to work best with reach weapons, as that is what is going to make this trigger most consistently. So this is where those things like the Gnome Flick Mace come in, although admittedly that did end up getting a very, very small nerf. On a critical hit, you disrupt the triggering action, which is pretty huge. This is something where I can remember individual moments on my Thaumaturge where my Thaumaturge disrupted a absolutely critical moment from an enemy. The weapon implement is pretty good here. Even if this is not a generic attack of opportunity, that's something like a fighter might have. The adept benefit is fine. It allows you to get a little bit of chip damage and makes it so that if you try to set up for a big strike and it doesn't work out, you still get a little bit of value out of it. The intensify vulnerability action is good, and it just becomes a matter of how many actions do you actually have to use this. And weapon thaumaturges sometimes have to make this choice between, do I want to attack twice and try to get this bonus exploit vulnerability damage on the enemy twice, or do I want to try to make one strike as accurately as possible and try to get one good solid blow? A lot of the guides that I read and a lot of the generic advice that I read from people say, try to make multiple strikes, try to get that damage multiple times. And in my play experience, I anecdotally found that it was often better to try to make one strike successful. But admittedly, I play at a very difficult table with mostly severe and extreme encounters, so that might be my circumstances changing my read on how to play a thaumaturge that might not be matching the play experience of the table that you are at. And honestly, the Paragon benefit is just stupid good. You disrupt the triggering action on a hit, not a critical hit, on a hit. That is just absolutely silly. Just no to your move action, no to your spell. The weapon implement, I think, has these moments where it gets big power-ups. So it gets its big power-up at level 5 when you get the critical weapon specialization. And then it gets the other big power-up at the Paragon benefit. So I think there are going to be times where the weapon implement feels better and worse. But this implement is very strong. And I think it's going to come down to what play patterns you are most interested in for whether or not you take the weapon. The weapon is very good, but is that what your party needs, or does your party need you to be a tank, or does your party need you to defend the allies? The weapon is great, but I don't think it is the be-all, end-all of thaumaturges. So let's put this all together and synthesize it into a tier list, so to speak, because I know people like those sorts of visuals. So this is where I think things fall if you are not playing in a free archetype game. And I have ranked these kind of, so the ones that appear first on a line are stronger. I think the generically strongest ones are the Regalia and the Tome. I believe that increasing your proficiency at skills and giving yourself extra skill trainings provides you a lot of benefits both in and out of combat. And Pathfinder is not a game that is all about combat. There are skill challenges to beat. There are mysteries to solve. And I think the Tome's flexibility is absurd. And I think the Regalia gives you a very, very good mix of roleplay opportunities while just giving you effective things in combat, like the ability to reduce frightened and later other conditions. I think those are generically the strongest implements. After that, still in this top tier, I believe are the better of the reaction implements, the amulet and the weapon. And you're going to have to make some choices about whether you care more about attempting to disrupt enemies via a critical hit on the weapon, whether you care about that critical weapon specialization, or whether you just want to have the ability to mitigate damage on yourself or others. I'm going to place the shield and the mirror in the situationally strong category rather than the generally strong category. The shield, at least at first, protects you, whereas the amulet protects you and your party members. I think the shield really starts to hit its stride at level 5 and will just become better and better and better after that. But I think the amulet hits the ground running in a way that the shield doesn't, so I'm going to bump the amulet to the tier above. I think the mirror is incredibly powerful. I think there are some out-of-combat opportunities available to it that are pretty cool, where you use the mirror to kind of get yourself to somewhere that your movement might not normally allow you to get to. And I've got a big old section on that in my original Advanced Thaumaturge guide. But I think the mirror has some real downsides that keep it out of the top tier, most notably that adept benefit of the mirror duplicate shattering not being optional and occasionally being something that will actively hurt your allies. In the tier below that, we have the things that I consider to be situation dependent. The wand, on a very, very specific Thaumaturge build, might be fine. But I think on the average Thaumaturge, you are not going to be overly impressed with the wand. It is a 2-action activity on a character that really, really has trouble doing 2-action activities consistently, because the Thaumaturge's class features just have so many 1-action activities that it wants you to be doing. And especially when you consider the fact that, like, hey, I'm supposed to intensify vulnerability on top of using the wand. Ugh, how am I going to make that work? I think there's the possibility for some cool, entirely ranged thaumaturges, but I think it's a tough sell. Similarly, I think the hit points that you are getting from the Chalice are fine, but I don't think the math points to this being one of the stronger implements, especially since some of its things require you to either get critically hit or be taking persistent bleed damage. I don't want to have to jump through too many hoops to use my Thaumaturge abilities. I would like them to generically be good, and I don't think the Chalice falls there. And then in this lowest tier, we have the Lantern and the Bell. The Lantern, it's such a specific campaign setting and style of game to make that good. And the Bell is, I think, just worse than the other reaction implements, since it requires a saving throw in a way that all of the others don't. Now, notably here, these are my rankings for a game that is not including free archetype. And your free archetype situation might vastly change how you value some of these things. For example, if you are a Thaumaturge who has taken a champion dedication and already has a good reaction, then the value of the reaction-focused implements is going to go down, and you might prefer some things like the Regalia or the Tome that are giving you those out-of-combat roleplay opportunities and ancillary in-combat benefits. Whereas if you take a dedication that makes your shield better and better and better, well, then all of a sudden your mirror implement that was already strong might bump itself up a tier as you go and get a reflexive shield from an archetype or something like that. Or, sticking with the mirror as an example, if you start picking up some feats that are things like your shielded strides that allow you for 2 actions to stride and strike and raise a shield, well, the shield is going to start looking better and better and better in that case, right? So these are kind of my generic rankings, but your specific circumstances are going to change this. If you are riding on a mount and all of a sudden moving is not part of your action economy, well, hey, then maybe the 2 action activity of the wand becomes more affordable. And now you are riding around flinging magic for 2 actions, shooting for 1 action, and you're still moving away from the enemy and trying to take advantage of that hyper long range of the wand. You can very much change how good some of these things are by what free archetypes you are choosing. And I think on that note, I'm going to go ahead and call it a day. I hope you all enjoyed. If you have any thoughts about the implements or you want to argue and tell me that I'm wrong, feel free to throw them down in the comments below. Have a great rest of the day. See ya.